What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be deconstructing and analyzing Gerard McMurray's film, Burning Sands, and explaining why I don't just think the film is extremely important to black culture. I think the film is one of the most important black films ever made. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. So, Burning Sands is an American drama film released back in 2017 about a student at the fictional, historically black college, Frederick Douglass University, who is proud to be a pledge of the also fictional black fraternity, Lambda Phi. But as he gets closer to finishing the process, and new anti-hazing rules have driven that process underground, the veteran members of the fraternity begin implementing more and more vicious techniques to test both he and his line brothers' resolve. The film was written by Christine Berg and Gerard McMurray, who also directed the film. It was also produced by Netflix in conjunction with Mandalay Pictures, among other less notable companies. And it stars Trevor Jackson as Zurich, with a host of other name and up-and-coming actors in supporting roles. The film premiered at the 2017 Sundance Film Festival and was later released exclusively on Netflix in March of the same year. And the movie currently holds a more than respectable 88% on Rotten Tomatoes, but that's only based on 26 critic reviews. But it does have a rather puzzling audience score of only 59%. Even though that score is based on only approximately 250 audience ratings. It has a 63 on Metacritic, but that's only based on 7 reviews, and it holds a 6.0 out of 10 on IMDb with only 3,000 reviews. I compare this film to Get Out, another black indie film released in the same year. That film currently has a 98 on Rotten Tomatoes with an audience score of 86. And that's based on 405 critic reviews and over 50,000 audience ratings. Get Out also has an 85 on Metacritic based on 48 critic reviews and a user score of 7.5 based on approximately 1,639 ratings. The film also has a 7.8 out of 10 on IMDb based on approximately 643,000 ratings. Now, why am I comparing this movie to Get Out, you might be asking? Well, I think I'm about to give somewhat of a hot take here, but I think this movie belongs in the same conversation with two of what I think are the most timely and impactful black indie films of the last 10 years. Those two movies being Jordan Peele's psychological horror film, Get Out, and Melina Mustaka's romantic crime drama, Queen and Slim. Now, there have only really been a handful of black films made that have broached the topic of frat culture at historically black colleges, Spike Lee's School Days, released in 1988, being the most popular. Then we had Stomp the Yard, starring Columbus Short and Megan Good in 2007, followed by the sequel, Stomp the Yard Homecoming, in 2010. Now, in 2013, we got Frat Brothers, but that film was an indie. With a budget so small and such little fanfare that the film doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. So I'm on the fence about whether or not to even count that one. And I've seen all those films in case you guys are wondering. The bigger ones more than once. And those films all fail, in my eyes, where Burning Sands succeeds. They fail to properly get down to the nuts and bolts of what pledging actually is. Now, School Days did a good enough job of bringing to light some of the unnecessarily oppressive tactics employed to subjugate pledges during the intake process. But that film was mostly about how we as black people allow division to prevent us from truly moving forward as a race of people, while spotlighting frat culture. The Stomp the Yard movies were more about what it takes to win a step show than what it actually takes to become a member of a fraternity. Now, if you're one of the many of us that has attended an HBCU, you know that frat culture permeates all throughout those campuses. In a lot of cases, it even heavily influences the social structure of other extracurricular groups on campus, most notably the marching bands. And a lot of us grew up in families where our parents or grandparents or, even other older family members were members of certain historically black fraternities or sororities. And because we looked up to them, whether they meant to or not, whether they even knew it or not, they were nudging us towards these organizations little by little from the time we were small children until we actually made it to college ourselves and were in situations where we could see those organizations up close. So in this movie, Zurich, the main character, is pledging Lambda Phi because his father pledged Lambda Phi when he was in college. Now, it isn't specifically noted whether Zurich's father went to Frederick Douglass University where he attends, but Zurich seems very driven by the fact that his father wasn't able to finish the process. So despite starting off Hell Week, getting severely injured by one of his big brothers during an early morning set, Zurich seems determined to, and I quote, see it through and succeed where his father failed. Now, in the movie, we watch Zurich avoid his father's calls all through Hell Week as his father tries to call him and check in on him, no doubt knowing to some extent what his son was going through. Now, Zurich has a girlfriend in the film. Her name is Rashawn, played by Imani Hakeem. And we watch him put a lot of effort into trying to balance satisfying his obligation to his line brothers and to the fraternity and satisfying his obligation to his girlfriend and their relationship. Now, I thought her performance in the film was serviceable, but her character wasn't really prominent enough in the film to have impacted it either way, in my opinion. I've seen some refer to her character as the loyal girlfriend of Zurich, but I honestly didn't see her that way at all. I actually think she was quite selfish in the film. The guys were only online for 4 weeks in total in this movie, and the only part of their process we actually got to see was the last week. So that means Rashawn, the loyal girlfriend of Zurich, couldn't even give her boyfriend a month to achieve something that was clearly important to him. And it's not like he wasn't still spending time with her while he was online. He had sex with her at the beginning of the film, right after getting kicked in the ribs several times at that early morning set I referred to earlier, to the point where he spent the entirety of the rest of the film injured. He was also on the yard with her a few times and was even caught once, and ended up getting beat for that as well. But the final straw for me was when she let a rumor be the catalyst for her and Zurich's breakup. The fact that she didn't believe her boyfriend when he said he didn't cheat on her just proved to me that she wasn't the right girl for him. And speaking of the right girl for Zurich, I actually think Angel, played by Soraya, was the right girl for Zurich in this movie. And this is where I felt like the writers missed an opportunity to have a female character in position to make a real impact on Zurich, unlike Professor Hughes, played by Alfre Woodard, who, to be fair, tried all throughout the film to be a support system to him as he struggled to keep up with his classwork. But, Zurich shut Professor Hughes down at every turn as she tried to help him. And I don't necessarily begrudge the writers for writing the film that way because it felt authentic. I mean, when I was online, I would have never allowed a female faculty member to convince me to confide in her in that way either. But I feel like Angel would have been better able to support Zurich through his process because they would have had more in common, in that she would have been much better able to understand what undergrad Greek life was all about than Rashawn did because she was already a part of it. Instead, I feel like the writers wasted her character, reducing her to basically arguing with another girl in class and grinding on Zurich during a Lambda Phi party. And then we have Toya, a boisterous employee at the local Whataburger, played by Nafessa Williams, who was essentially used in the film as a plot device, if you ask me. Despite that fact, she did have a chance to put her thumb on the scale, so to speak, affecting Zurich in both his pledge process and his relationship. She helped Zurich get through a complicated night of set when she was brought to the house and the pledges were ordered to basically run a train on her. she made it possible for Zurich to fake his part of the encounter when it became clear that he was still suffering from the rib injury that he sustained during the early morning set at the beginning of the film. This was an interesting turn of events because we had already seen Zurich have fairly vigorous intercourse with his girlfriend right after coming from that set at the beginning of the film. So to me, it was clear he was capable again of seeing it through. Though I imagine he probably was also hesitant to sleep with Toya due to the fact that he was in a committed relationship with Rashawn. But both Toya and the aforementioned plot point is still extremely important to the story because Rashawn and her easily agitated roommate Joy, played by Raquel Bianca John, overhear Toya talking to a co-worker about having slept with an entire line of lambdas, which ultimately precipitates the breakup between Zurich and Rashawn. I would argue that despite having no real ties to Zurich, that Toya is the most important female to him and his journey throughout the entire film. Now, moving on to the males in the movie, I want to start off by talking about the alumni bros. So the alumni bros in the film basically appear in cameos, where they are receiving calls from pledges as they check in. And when the pledges check in with the alumni bros, they are basically told to keep their heads up and again, see it through. And as we watch what's happening to the pledges throughout the course of the film, this part was kind of disappointing to me, not only because the alumni bros know exactly what's going on throughout the process, because they themselves went through it, but also because they're the only ones off campus who might be able to use their influence to keep the neophytes and the prophytes under control. They didn't. They don't use their influence at all to keep the pledges safe, and unfortunately, that's a very realistic depiction of what actually happens throughout processes like these. And speaking of the neophytes and prophytes, the writers did a good job of making each big brother different and having the differences in their personalities impact the pledges' initiation experience differently as well. First, we got Stefan, played by Mitchell Edwards, who was the PT instructor. He was basically in charge of working the pledges out. Now, he could get out of pocket at times in the process of doing his job, and in fact, he's the one that injures Zurich at the beginning of the film. Now, Edwin, played by Rotimi, made the pledges use their heads, and he worked to instill discipline among the group. He wasn't routinely physically violent with them, but he didn't allow them to break rules either, and at times he could be heard talking down to them in some real disparaging ways, ways that I thought were unnecessary to get his point across, and he would especially do this in front of other students. Now, Big C, played by Christian Robinson, was the enforcer. He was absolutely the most violent one of the group, the first one to grab the paddle. And he also did one of the most egregious things I've ever seen done during a pledge process in one of the scenes in this film. He spit on a pledge. And last but not least, Fernander, played by Trevante Rhodes. You might remember him from Moonlight. But he was the line's dean of pledges. He sought to educate the pledges not only on how to be a lambda, but what it meant to be a lambda as well. He did step in during a set when Big C was about to strike a pledge with a paddle from overhead. So I guess that's something. Now, let's talk about Zurich's line brothers. So we got Ernest, or Square, played by Deron Horton, and he was the ace of the line. He was from Indiana, and his family seemed like they were at least upper middle class because he had an apartment and a car, even though it wasn't a nice car. But he didn't have to live in the dorms. Now, when he and Zurich spend some alone time together towards the end of the film, Zurich tries to convince him to go with him to talk to Dean Richardson about the way the pledges are being treated. And in that moment, Square reminds Zurich that he, nor his line brothers even knows what his real name is, and that he isn't pledging for what he thinks he can get in the future, like Zurich is. He's pledging for what he can get right now. He tells Zurich that he desires, above all else, respect, quite simply. And it feels like he wants that respect from both the men and the women on campus. Now, we also find out later in the film that he didn't have sex with Toya the night that they were supposed to sleep with her, but that he really wanted to. And to me, this is the writer's way of kind of painting Ernest as the type that may have been intimidated by her robust sexual appetite. Now, Ron, played by Octavius J. Johnson, was the number 2. He was a Christian man and a virgin who was saving himself for marriage. So I believe it's safe to say that he didn't sleep with Toya either during the night they were supposed to have done so. His character wasn't as much of a focus, and therefore he didn't get as much attention paid to his character's development over the course of the film as some of the other guys did. Now, next in line, we got Frank, the number 3, played by Tosin Cole. Now, Frank was the one pledge who openly told the others that he didn't care about them. And, if you've ever pledged a fraternity, you know that every line got at least one of these dudes. Except maybe they're not so vocal about telling their LBs to their faces that they don't give a crap about them. Mostly because that can create a really messed up dynamic and make the pledge process take both longer than it should, and it can kind of become a little more violent than it has to be if you've got something like that kind of floating around the line out in the open. But his character eventually came to care for his LBs by the end of the film. So even though Frank isn't a central character of the film either, he did have a really nice character arc, in my opinion. Then we got the tail dog, Dwight, played by Malik Bazile. Now, I don't know how this character became the tail of the line because Trevor Jackson was taller than him and everybody else on the line. But it appeared that they might not have assigned numbers by height in Lambda Phi because Square was taller than Ron also. So anyway, this character was more like a featured extra, so there's not much to say about him other than the fact that he was on the football team and that he seemed to have a real interest in Toya. We saw him kind of looking her up and down when they got to the Whataburger, like he was really interested. We saw him kind of paying close attention to her at the frat party when Edwin wouldn't let her in. And then, he finally even tried to holler at her when they were at the Whataburger waiting for Zurich to show up so they could go to the spot and get ready for their Hell Night. But the last man in the film that I really want to talk about is the one I was the most disappointed in, and that was Dean Richardson, played by Steve Harris. Now, this man failed these young men that were online in every single way that truly mattered from the moment he recommended Zurich for initiation. Being a member of Lambda Phi himself, he knew what the process was all about. And though he did check in on Zurich once or twice during the film, he wasn't nearly concerned about Zurich's welfare as a dean should have been. In fact, when Zurich finally went alone to talk to Dean Richardson about what was going on during the process, he was asked by Dean Richardson if he just expected to walk into the frat. And, to have a grown man whose job it is to protect and educate these young black students say something like that to him was just completely off the wall to me. And what made it worse was Dean Richardson then told Zurich to stand up and recite "See It Through." Now, the finale of the film involves Zurich finishing a paper that he owes Professor Hughes before then rushing to meet his line brothers at the spot, where he gives them an inspirational speech about how when they cross over, they're going to do things differently. They then go to the frat house where they get their heads shaved by the big brothers and basically preparing them for their Hell Night. They then stop off at a gas station for gas and beer for the big brothers, and they share a few last minutes of bonding where we find out, again, like I said, that Frank is the only one who actually had sex with Toya the night they were asked to do so. And after they share a few laughs over that, they all get back into the car and they head to a remote location to start their quote-unquote Hell Night. Once they arrive, they're ushered out of the cars and into a barn where there are lots of big brothers waiting for them. And it even looks like it was some of the alumni bros that we saw in the cameos earlier in the film as well. And that's when all hell breaks loose. They're separated by the big brothers and constantly physically attacked as they try to protect themselves and, do the best they can to just kind of withstand the acts of physical violence being exacted against them. And all I can do is describe this scene as complete chaos. And to some extent, that's what these kind of nights during a pledge process actually are. Now, the scene comes to a complete halt when Frank is rendered unconscious. And it's at this point that the big brothers do exactly what they always do when someone is gravely injured. They throw their hands up and they back away from the person who's hurt as if to say, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. Edwin, in a panic, then instructs the pledges to take Frank to the hospital, but he doesn't tell them to take him inside. He tells them to drop him off at the front of the hospital and leave him there, and that somebody will come out and get him. And no doubt he's trying to keep Lambda Phi out of the fray over this, if at all possible, and that's why he's telling them to do that. It's a heartless plan to be sure, but again, I'm not upset at the writers for writing it that way because I felt like this is something that might get said. It might not get done in real life, but it might actually get suggested by somebody in the heat of a moment like this one. So the pledges indeed rush Frank to the hospital, but they don't just leave him at the front door like they were told to. Instead, they go inside with him and they wait to hear from the doctors that Frank has died of a ruptured artery. The final image of the film shows a teary-eyed Zurich picking up his cell phone and finally calling his dad. Now, my overall impression of this film, I think it's the freshest take I've seen as it pertains to the growing subgenre of films about African-American college fraternity experience. And I felt like the film did a good job at sparking discussion about Greek letter organizations and their obsession with bonding rituals and tradition as a way to both prepare for and criticize the world that exists beyond college. Now, the story of the naive college student being initiated into a fraternity as a pledge and surviving the process is inherently dramatic, and almost every story of its kind is told on film seems to wind up being a story of either the loss of innocence or radicalization of some kind. The young man seeking admission into these groups does so in search of abstract ideas like brotherhood, but usually comes out on the other side much more cynical about those very ideals than he was when he went in. And I think Gerard McMurray, takes that feeling and places it where a lot of black men can better relate to it, a historically black college campus. And the film's strength is in the way McMurray chose to tell this story, using an almost docudrama style to highlight the dehumanization of young black men, while pointing out the contradictions of Greek life on an African-American university campus. I think he's successful in crafting a tale about adults acting like adolescents and adolescents pretending to be grown men. And most of all, a look at how these organizations tend to wrap themselves in idealism and tradition and really do nothing more than brainwash their members into repeating the same old outdated codes and tropes from one generation to the next. But this movie has a lot more bite than the ones that came before it. And that's a rather ironic quality, seeing a black college, a place that was the site of cultural and intellectual emancipation for our forefathers, now being used to subject our young men to rituals that are filled with situations drawn straight from the very past that we as a people struggled and died trying to escape. With the basic justification for doing so being, well, this is what I went through, so you're going to go through it too. And what makes it worse is the big brothers tend to feel like the pledges need to shut up and take it like a man while doing it. But I don't think any real growth is possible if these practices can't be refined or eliminated in the name of progress. This is what I think makes Burning Sands stand out apart from all the movies that came before it. In this film, We literally watched the pledges be dehumanized, renamed, and stripped of their individuality in order to present themselves as empty vessels into which the history and traditions of the Lambda Phi Brotherhood can be poured. And the crazy thing is, hazing is illegal in all 50 states in this country. And as much as we all know that, we still understand that this is very much a reality for a lot of the college students who seek entrance into Greek organizations. And while McMurray doesn't rely on the weirdness or the brutality or point blank the borderline torture that some of these experiences can entail, taking it literally underground, as many fraternities do, by hazing pledges in basements where authorities cannot see or hear what's happening, unless somebody tells them, of course, wraps a shameful practice in a nice, tidy, metaphorical bow. But what do you guys think? Do you think Burning Sands was a good film? Did you even see it? And if you did, do you think the film does a good job at provoking conversations about how we can do better by each other in our community? Or were you one of the people who just simply found fault with McMurray for essentially airing out our dirty laundry? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you all who might be new to the channel, be sure to like and subscribe. That way you'll be notified when I drop a new video. Also, be sure to go and check out themadscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write, and I'll catch y'all in the next video.